Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I'm Hunter Newby. I'm the CEO of Allied Fiber, and we're here at NYU today in New York City for a meeting of the New York Internet Society. And thank you all very much for attending. So I'm going to give an overview of Allied Fiber as it relates to our business model, present day here in the United States, and also touch on some of the other infrastructure projects that are happening around the world, the similarities, the differences, but also focus on why now for what it is that we are embarking upon as it represents the disparate elements of the industry, but also to begin with a vantage point on the historical aspects of physical air interconnection here in the United States, in certain particular places like in New York City and abroad. But before we begin, we should frame our discussion. And that discussion is really based upon, as I've broken it down here for the group, three things. And those three things are fundamental and very critically important to understand before we even address the topic of fiber. Because fiber in and of itself is very murky and difficult to understand if it's dark or if it's lit or if it's for lease or IRU or it's an managed service. Well, people use the word fiber, it's very broad. It almost has no definition, yet the people that say fiber say it with such conviction that you think that you know what they're saying. But before we get there, let's talk about these three key points. Internet protocol and the internet are two different things. It is very important. Internet protocol and the internet are two different things. So to just touch on that briefly for 1 second, voice over IP or VoIP is not voice over the internet. It's just voice over internet protocol, which in most cases and in many cases is deployed over a private layer 2 infrastructure strictly for the purposes of IP transporting, establishing sessions for voice, which today are predominantly SIP, but in the past you could have had H.323 or MGCP or whatever. It's important to know the distinction between internet protocol and the internet, or the public internet, because when you start to get into discussions between what is the internet and then the protocol itself, both things essentially existing at layer 3, but one just being a protocol and one being a collection of disparate networks that interconnect in various places around the world. If you don't understand the difference between those things, you won't understand the value and the difference of point number 2. Net neutrality, which is a heated topic today, much debate, a lot of pundits, a lot of industry people are involved in this, and it is probably one of the most widely misunderstood things going in the entire technology communications world right now. Net neutrality is not about the internet. It's about access to the internet. That is a very important yet subtle distinction, maybe invisible distinction. The reason why net neutrality is not about the internet and it's about access to the internet is found here in point 3. Net neutrality is network neutrality, not internet neutrality. So essentially the FCC is looking at regulating the wrong thing. People use the term net neutrality often and loosely. And the problem with that is the same problem as saying VoIP, in parentheses, voice over the internet, wrong. Same problem with saying fiber, but not clearly defining fiber. Is it dark fiber available for lease on a long-term basis with reasonable rates and terms to anyone? Or is it fiber, well, managed fiber, which really means a lit service from a single provider who can dictate the terms and conditions and rates, etc. You can't just use the word without defining it. And I know it's tedious, and I don't particularly like having to get into all of these distinctions every time you have a conversation, because it sounds like, you're giving some dissertation for lawyers. No offense to the lawyers in the room. But these things are very, very important, and there are very clear lines that need to be drawn here before you can start to have the discussion. But captured in the essence of what it is that Allied Fiber does and other entities that build fiber infrastructure that's truly neutral and available for any entity to buy it, is the word access. Physical access. Physical access is what dictates, in the network sense, freedom. If you can create your own physical access, then it's yours and you possess it. It's like owning a house, but that you don't own the driveway. And you'd have to pay a toll every time you wanted to go to your own house or leave your own house. Everyone owns their own driveway, right? Well, the driveway is not owned by the people that own the house, and the road in front of the house is owned by someone else. And that's the problem. It's about physical access, and it is something as simple and fundamental as the driveway. Now, the driveway is an analogy. Is it the last mile? Is it the middle mile? Is it the long haul? Is it the back haul? Is it the backbone? It's all of the above. Physical access to physical layer network elements in the last mile, to the home, to the tower, to the building, to the business, to the data center, to the teleport, to the RLAC, to the MSO, to the CAP, to the CLAC, to whatever. Physical access to the middle mile piece, from that community ring, that municipality ring, that LEC, that MSO, to the closest junction point to a long haul network. These are your three distinct pieces. Last mile physical layer, middle mile, to the long haul, and then the long haul. And if you are an entity that has at least the opportunity to possess the physical asset itself to get all the way to the next largest internet peering point or carrier neutral meet point, then you are in control. Anyone that's going to sell you a lit service knows that their price has to be dictated by the fact that your alternative is to do it yourself. And then all of a sudden things are rationalized, they're normalized, they're realistic. But that comes from access. Not legislated access, not paper access, not Washington, D.C. deliberated and regulated access, real access. Built and available for any and all to use. So, these are the important things to know. Internet protocol and the internet are totally different things. Net neutrality is about access to the internet. And net neutrality really means network neutrality and not internet neutrality. And our greatest fear is that the FCC regulates the public internet or starts to regulate networks that access the public internet but bleed into regulating the internet itself, which would be highly problematic. So a little bit about the history of myself, history of things interconnected, history of New York City. The company that I was with prior to Allied Fiber is a company called Telex. And Telex was started here in New York City at 60 Hudson Street, which is a building that's widely known in the carrier world, in the internet world, in the broadcast TV world, in the foreign currency exchange world, in every world that you could think of that has anything to do with communications. 60 Hudson Street is the A or the Z loc on practically every circuit that leaves this country and goes to Europe. And there's other buildings like it in the United States, not many, that are equally as impressive, as dense, have as a robust a history as this particular site. And the Telex business originally started in international wholesale minutes and arbitrage, but through an understanding, it became the largest physical layer interconnection point in the building. Now, 60 Hudson Street is 835,000 square feet. It's the original Western Union World Headquarters. It's a very important building. It dates back to the 1920s, 1929 to be exact. And it was built to be Western Union's World Headquarters. Western Union was the telegraph powerhouse for the United States, and it was actually a shell company funded to roll up distressed telegraph assets west of the Hudson River and unionize them. And it was started in the 1800s, the mid-1800s, right after the Civil War. It was a roll-up play, telecom roll-up play. Brilliant. And it became the dominant player, the monopoly player, and basically had no competition. Until Bell Telephone wanted to compete with it but Alexander Graham Bell himself was not allowed to compete against Western Union because the federal government said that telephone and telegraph were two different technologies. So he was not allowed to compete directly with Western Union. So Bell created a little company called American Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T, to compete with Western Union and take telegraph customers and make them telephone customers. And what was the most compelling thing that AT&T had over Western Union? It was Alexander Graham Bell's vision to put a phone in everyone's home, thus eliminating the distance, the proximity between the person in their home and the distance they had to travel to send and receive a message, to get to the telegraph office. Brilliant. In solving that problem and creating a luxury for people by putting a phone in their home, Alexander Graham Bell succeeded in creating what we call today the last mile issue. So the issue is reversed. Well, if you fast forward many years, without getting into the whole full history of this, Western Union's building, after the telegraph business, its demise in the late 70s and early 80s, the building's infrastructure is amazing. Very strong building, a lot of clay ducts for pneumatic tubes, the transfer of paper telegraph messages. It was pretty much vacant in the early to mid 80s. And the AT&T building, which was built at the same time in the 1920s by the same guy, Ralph Walker, okay? He was hired to build both of those buildings because they were connected underground with clay duct pneumatic tubes so that paper messages could move from one telegraph network to the other, because there was no switch that could take the electromagnetic current from one network and put it onto the other. Those two buildings were basically the first two email servers ever built. And the way the messages transferred from one network to the other was in paper form, in canisters through compressed air and clay duct tubes that went 7 blocks in Lower Manhattan. And that's how telegraph messages got around the United States. It's pretty amazing. Well, those clay duct tubes became very important to a company called MCI, because this guy McGowan that started MCI with the consent decree in hand went to AT&T and said, you need to open up your network because the decree says so, and we want to connect our switches to your switches here at 32 Avenue of the Americas. And AT&T said, yeah, that's right, that's what the consent decree says, but there's nothing in the decree that says that we have to become your landlord. You see, McGowan was looking for AT&T to give them space in 32 Avenue of the Americas for the MCI equipment necessary to connect to the AT&T equipment. But that little piece was left out of the consent decree. No one had even conceived of it. The whole entire notion of co-location. And upon that point, essentially, the genesis of the entire carrier-neutral co-location business was born. Because MCI then had to find another way to get into 32A of A. And what did they find? The old clay ducts in the streets of Manhattan that were built in the 20s. This is in the 80s. Pretty much everybody forgot about them. So MCI went and leased space at 60 Hudson Street specifically to get access to the clay ducts so that they could pull their cables through into the basement of AT&T's building without having to rip up the streets. And then MCI did that and was successful in connecting their long-distance switches to the international long-distance switches of AT&T. And so goes the actual, true manifestation of deregulation in the United States of long distance. Could you imagine? The whole thing on paper was meaningless if it wasn't for that physical access to the switches. The fact that you could write it on a piece of paper and say the network is open is meaningless without the physical connection actually happening. And that didn't happen until MCI put its equipment at 60 Hudson. So 60 Hudson, from the mid-80s through the mid-90s and into the late 90s, became the physical home of competition. 32A of A was the incumbent. 60 Hudson was where all the competitors went. One of the first competitors that went in there was a company called Teleport Group. Who remembers TCG? Yeah. One of the next that went in there, MFS, Metropolitan Fiber Systems, the old Chicago fiber optic out of Chicago, in the coal tunnels. Talk about physical access. CFO used the old Chicago coal tunnels that they used to use with a rail car underground where they used to ship coal to the basement of buildings, okay, for the boilers. And that's where they ran the fiber cable, because the tunnels were already built. Sunk cost and capex for the construction of a distribution system at the physical layer, which gave rise to the creation of a physical fiber network. Without the coal tunnel, CFL wouldn't have existed. Certainly not at those price points. And then another interesting company moved into 60 Hudson Street, Rochester Telephone. Rochester Telephone. We have a Rochester Telephone alumni here today with us. Anyway, by 1996, the Telecom Act was written, and the Telecom Act had a provision in it, provision 214. So Section 214 created the realm of the common carrier license. Basically, 3 people could go fill out a form and pay a fee, and you could become a telephone company. And you could buy and sell minutes. And that caused an explosion in the development of voice switches, and an explosion in the number of actual carriers, facilities-based carriers, meaning you own a switch, you bought a circuit from one provider, and you had another, and you arbitraged voice. And I always refer to those days as the Wild West, the gunslinging Wild West days. And that's what really created this phenomenon within 60 Hudson Street. And the original company, Telex, was exactly one of those companies. A 214, buying and selling international wholesale minutes in 60 Hudson Street. What was the biggest problem that Telex had in terms of the network? The biggest problem that Telex had was getting physically connected to the other IXCs in the building. Telex is on the 23rd floor, and that was the highest floor in the building. You know, 24th is a walk-up, but elevator stops at 23. All the other floors, and if you know the building, it kind of gets narrow at the top, and as you go to the bottom, it gets really wide. So the bottom 12 floors are huge. They're 70, 80,000 square foot floor plates. And there was multiple suites, and they were all occupied by telephone companies that had no physical connections to the other. So the only way that the IXCs could connect to each other was using LECs. CLECs like MFS and Time Warner Telecom and Time Warner Cable, Nextlink, which became XO, and so many others. And the issue was that in many cases, to get connected from one suite to another in the building, you had to go through a third-party LEC. And back in the late 90s, it could take a LEC 4 to 5 months to provision one circuit to go between 2 floors in that building. It was totally unacceptable and nerve-wracking. So at Telex, we came up with a way to solve for that problem to help drive our own international wholesale minutes business. And the solution was to get the IXCs in the other suites to build physical conduit from their suite to ours and bring their own fiber from their suite to ours and put a multiplexer in our suite and demux the optical circuits to electrical circuits so that we could cross-connect directly to our switch, and we cut out the LECs. This epiphany took place in late 1998, early 1999. By the year 2000, Telex had jettisoned the 214 wholesale minutes business and focused on becoming something that had never existed before. The single place within 60 Hudson Street to facilitate physical layer interconnections between all of the carriers in 60 Hudson Street. We became what is essentially known as a meet-me room. And that's what we did. And it was revolutionary. And Telex became the physical layer interconnection standard for that building, which, if you think about things in the world, New York City is the most sought-after market for many things. There were a lot of people trying to solve that puzzle, crack that riddle. And we at Telex did it. So we grew our business and quadrupled it again and quadrupled it again. And it was quite amazing. So it still exists, obviously, to this day, and it's doing quite well. I, myself, and the others exited the business. In 2006, it was sold, and I left in 2008 to form Allied Fiber. A couple of milestone points from 98 to 03. what I call chaos to orderly connection. You can probably imagine 60 Hudson Street with several hundred carriers within the building, primary tenants and then subtenants and subtenants of subtenants, and more networks coming as other countries in the world deregulated, and satellite, and then the birth of the internet, and using IP for voice, and vocal tech, and all these other companies that created equipment for compression, and then IP, and then we had ITXC, which was one of our first big tenants, who then ultimately became, Teleglobe bought them, and now they're part of, I'm forgetting their name, Reliance? I think Reliance bought Teleglobe, or was it Tata? Reliance bought them, thank you. All of those things, well, not all, but a lot of them, their inception was at Telex at 60 Hudson Street. One of the things that was actually conceived of and born in 2003 at 60 Hudson Street at Telex on the 9th floor was the voice peering fabric. If you don't know what the voice peering fabric is, you should go to thevpf.com and check it out. It is a globally distributed layer 2 Ethernet switch fabric for voice over IP. There's no voice switch in it at all. It's a VLAN provisioning mechanism for VoIP switches globally. It's a distributed peering fabric. It's a V4, V6 exchange, and there's no cost for minutes between the parties. And there's actually a very nice large enum registry that sits within it that processes about 2 billion minutes a year, totally free. And a lot of universities use it, by the way, and other people, CLACs and all sorts of stuff. There's a lot of firsts that happened here. Anyway, the next big first was 2004. Telex acquired 56 Marietta Street in Atlanta, Georgia, this building. This is one of the 8 carrier hotels in North America that matters. I say that because these buildings are really neural points for networks. They are where the subsea fibers meet, the long-haul fibers meet, the regional fibers meet, the metro fibers. There are really only a few places like it, and they're very, very valuable, very important places. And what goes on inside this building, which, by the way, it's an old Western Union building. Western Union built it back in the teens. And it actually sits on the footers of the old state capitol, which is a building that Sherman burned to the ground. So there's like a whole lot of history there. Fantastic building. Telex acquired this building in 2004. And then, of course, Telex was sold to a private equity firm in 2006. Anyway, this phase I refer to as replication and growth. The model that was created at 60 Hudson Street, chaos to orderly connection, physical layer, was replicated and grown in another market. We proved that we could do it somewhere else. This is very important. And this is all history. In May of 2004, when we were, as Telex, acquiring 56 Marietta Street, I had the pleasure of meeting an individual in Atlanta, in the building, who represents Norfolk Southern Railroad. This is the Norfolk Southern Railroad right-of-way map. This is what they refer to as the system. These are rail lines, and underneath the rail lines are dirt. Is dirt. Did I say that right? You could get on their property in Florida and walk all the way to New York and never leave their property. Can you think of any other entity that can do that? Most utility companies don't have that kind of range. These rights-of-way date back to the Civil War. This is very important. This is how the U.S. was built. Coal, oil, steel, cars. Out west, you have other railroads. BNSF, Union Pacific, but here you have NS, and some others, but specifically NS. So why was I meeting with NS? Why did this guy come to see me? He came to see me because Norfolk Southern had created something in the mid-90s called T-Cubed, which is this map over here. And T-Cubed is thoroughbred technology and telecommunications. T-Cube NS invested a lot of money, a couple $100 million, in putting duct, clear duct, just like those clay ducts, those pneumatic tubes that connected 60 Hudson Street. It's all about physical access. They built Duct. They built Duct in some of the right-of-way, not all, some. And they came to us at Telex, specifically me in Atlanta on this day, because the prior owners of 56 Marietta Street would not allow T-Cube to bring their ducts into the building because they were afraid that the railroad would steal their customers and put them in some other building. I saw it differently. So one of the very first things that I wanted us to do at Telex after we closed on the acquisition of the building was to get the T-Cube ducts from the railroad tracks just behind the building into the building. Because it was our belief that by doing that, more fiber would come into the building. People wouldn't leave, fiber would come in. So what happened? We acquired the building, closed, we did a deal with T-Cube, T-Cube brought the ducts in. Within 15 days, Southern Telecom and AGLN, which was just recently acquired by Zayo, brought in dual, diverse 432 count dark fiber cables. Phenomenal. Carrier hotels and data centers live and die on fiber, and they don't own any of it. It's the networks that build it. But without competition at the physical layer with fiber, what good is a data center? What good is a carrier hotel? It doesn't exist without fiber. There is no marketplace, there is no exchange. If there was only one carrier, they'd set the floor rate. No one could get access to fiber because the carriers, not all, but most don't lease dark fiber, particularly long haul. Metro, yeah, you can find it, but so what? One city's not the whole world. You need access to other points. So to us, this was very valuable. And the very first day that I met this gentleman and saw these two maps, I looked at it and I asked him a simple question. Why wouldn't Norfolk Southern or T-Cube put fiber in this whole system and just lease fibers off to all the network operators? That's what people really want. They don't want duct, they don't want dirt, they want a pair of fibers. And the railroad said, that's not what we do. We're in the transportation business. That's what we do. What we want to do is lease these ducts off to buyers, carriers. But the problem is that the universe is much smaller for people that want to buy a duct and put a cable in it than people that just want a pair of fibers, which is a smaller universe than the people that just want to buy a 10 gig wave, which is a smaller universe than people that just need a 100 meg circuit. So you can see how it's sort of an inverted pyramid. But the point is, at this level, how many people are in the pyramid? One. How many people have cables in their ducts? A handful. How many people lease fibers in those cables? A couple handfuls, so on and so on. So I said, well, why wouldn't you guys just do this? And no, we're a railroad, we're in transportation business, we don't do that. But if you know someone that would like to do that and connect some of the missing pieces and complete the system, we'd like to talk to them because we're interested in leasing the duct. That was May of 2004, and that's when it hit me. The market wasn't ready for that at the time, because if you think back to May of 2004, the New York to Miami route, which in my mind is Europe to Latin America through the US, connecting continents, which is really what it is. And then you look at New York to Chicago, which is really the first leg of the Seattle route, which is the Pacific, connecting Asia to Europe, which is really what it is. Well, we were essentially in the United States in telecom infrastructure fiber build-out version 1.0. You had Progress Telecom and Wiltel and Broadwing and Quest and Level 3 and da-da-da-da-da-da. So there was ample competition on the lit service basis for the NFL cities, which was what the original plan was for the build-out in the United States. No regard for anything in between. So the time wasn't right. But I thought that it was probably going to change. There would be mergers and acquisitions and consolidation, as there typically is, and that whatever the surviving entity was that acquired all the others, they would try to control the market, control access to the physical fiber, control the rates, which is a normal sort of thing to do. That's what happened. There was a lot of consolidation post-2004 up to 2007, particularly in the long haul. And coming into 2008 is when we started to see globally a spike in IP traffic. and you could literally go back and look to when YouTube was started and when Hulu was started and other things like that that we're also familiar with. And wireless really started to expand, and people started to put multimedia applications on wireless devices. Do you know how the Asian IP traffic gets to Europe? Primarily through the United States. There are a couple of cables that were built the other way, but they're owned by Tata and Reliance, and of course there's the Rostel and Transtel routes through Siberia, which are big but not that robust. The vast majority are the subsea cables in the Pacific connecting to the subsea cables in the Atlantic through the United States. So at the very moment where traffic is spiking globally between continents in the US, the long-haul assets are gone. And it's very contentious. So I started getting calls from my customers at Telex to me saying, we're having a big problem with backhaul. And I'm not talking about backhaul for 20 miles in Pennsylvania. I'm talking about backhaul between Europe and South America. And they said, our problem is we've got X hundred gigs and we need to go to 2X that number, and we need to do it in 1 year. But it's not feasible or practical or economically rational for us to just continue to buy wavelengths. We want fiber because we own fiber in Europe and in South America, but we don't own it here, and now we need to own it here, so we have to have continuity. But we can't get it because no one will sell it to us. So they asked me, could you help us find it? And if you can't find it, build it and we'll buy it. So that was the genesis of the concept of Allied Fiber right there. The Allied Fiber design, and we affectionately call this the cartoon, okay? Because we've written it on the back of napkins so many times that it just got tedious and totally insane. And really we needed to add some color. You know, the ballpoint pen on the cocktail napkin just wasn't cutting it. This is it. It's generic, it's nondescript, there aren't any city names on here. This is any ocean, Atlantic, the Caribbean, the Pacific. But it captures the essence of what it is that we're trying to do. We start and end at the subsea landing points. Why? Because we know where they are, and they're very important. They hold the whole Earth together in a network sense. They hold the continents together. And if you want to start to really, well, where's the riverhead? That's the riverhead. That's the greatest amount of capacity you could possibly imagine. And these points precede carrier hotels. All the subsea landings are different, but that all routes into the major carrier hotels, anywhere in the world, not just in the US. Then we have the dual duct design. We actually have 3 ducts, but we didn't want to add a green line and, you know, make our color prices go up and everything else. The green line's for growth and maintenance, but the things that you need to understand about our system are that this blue line is what would be most akin to the legacy long-haul builds. This blue line is a high-count cable. It's a 432. It's a composite shift between single mode and non-zero dispersion shifted fiber. And it's not meant to be interfered with but for the Allied Fiber co-location regeneration facilities, which are spaced every 60 miles. That's the way all existing long-haul systems in the United States are built today, because that's the way they built them then, because they had an NFL city model. And they were built by carriers, so they weren't meant to be essentially carrier neutral to the fiber pair level. The regen facilities that exist today on long-haul systems were built for the carrier itself, and any excess space was, you know, bundled together with a fiber sale so that those carriers could make their numbers for a quarter or whatever. Very rarely, outside of a regional or a metro, if at all, were there any purpose-built companies for strictly dark fiber and real estate. Matter of fact, I can't think of any in the United States that were meant to be this. Never to be lit, strictly to treat it as real estate. Just like the Telex model, just real estate. Not a carrier, don't sell loops, don't sell transit, don't sell long haul, don't sell voice. Just facilitate connections between other networks. That is this model. Now, because of the fact that the blue line can't be cut into, because if you just went and dug it up and cut it, you'd be disrupting the fiber, you'd be disrupting the long-haul optics, the actual lasers that are pushing light. Ultra-long-haul DWDM does not like people just tapping into the fiber any old place. You don't want to do that as well, because this is a multi-tenant cable. Nobody is going to agree to somebody else digging it up just to peel out one pair. Taboo. So that's why we have the red line. This is the short haul duct. Think of this as the Long Island Expressway. Think of that as the service road. Think of this as the Garden State Parkway, and this is the local. Whatever analogy you want to come up with, there's a lot of them in highways and roads for sure. The red line is meant to be cut into. It's a completely different fiber cable, it's a different count, and it's a different composite shift. And it's meant to be cut where we could excavate, get down to the duct level, which is 6 feet below the surface, and place a handhold, which is essentially a 4x4 box. And inside that box is a splice enclosure, and inside that enclosure is the cable where you could peel out ribbons, and you could do individual fusion splices, so that as we go out along the road, well look, there could be a building, a data center, an office park, a school, a campus, a town, a community, an existing RLEC network, an existing MSO network, a teleport. Teleports desperately need fiber today in order to compete with backhaul challenges being what they are. Cell towers. The short haul duct and the whole purpose of short haul fiber as a parallel system against the long haul fiber for allied fiber is for fiber to the tower. Now that is a concept that didn't even exist 10 years ago. No one could have put that design characteristic in the network because wireless was in its infancy. Analog phones could have enough sessions over a T1 or multiple T1s that there would never be any congestion. Who remembers dial-up? Dial-up internet access. Okay.
We still have customers.
We'll walk down memory lane here. We all actually know more about this than we think we do, and we all actually know what's about to happen. This is a card trick that we've seen. As a matter of fact, we're the magicians. Let's talk about dial-up. America Online. Remember that cheesy commercial with the two guys? I'm sorry, I can't play golf today. I've got to book a flight and I've got to get something for my wife for her birthday. It's like the cheesiest commercial ever. I used to not watch it because it was so cheesy. I thought it was like a repeat from the 60s or something. And then I finally watched it and I'm like, what's that guy talking about? The other guy goes, no, all you have to do is go online. You could make your flight reservations and buy your wife flowers in 2 minutes and then we can go play golf. Okay. Well, once that caught on, what happened? It went from America Online to America on hold. And the World Wide Web became the World Wide Wait. Because why? Because there wasn't enough physical access on the inbound from the POTS lines into the central offices where the modem banks were. If you want to get technical about it and really boil it down, there was too many people trying to get in. It was like an 8-lane, 16-lane road going into a 1-lane tunnel. It's like trying to get out of the city at night, the Midtown Tunnel. You're waiting forever. Okay. So the backbones of the original internet, Merit, T1, and then OC3, 1248, plenty of backbone capacity, not enough inbound. So there were some deals cut, and people started to get more antes, but you still had a local access problem with dial-up. And then something happened which was amazing, transformational. Cable modem access. And all of a sudden, the pendulum swung the other way. And it went from 33.6, 56K if you're lucky, to a meg. In some cases, multi-meg. And then a weird thing happened. DSL kind of came back into the fray. So you had like a copper repeat after you had an HFC coax thing. But in any case, we were moving in the right direction. People went from 33.6 to 700 to a couple of megs to Fios and fiber to the home. Okay. Well, now that we're at the fiber to the home level today, and people are pushing 10, 20, 30, 40 megs from their house, the pendulum swings back. And now what do we have? We have a problem on the backbone side. How do all those little rural networks and community networks and small cable companies and all this other stuff get access to the super fast backbone internet if they can't get on it? And that's where this comes into play. Now let's add the wild card. The wild card is wireless, but we actually know exactly the same pattern that's going to unfold. We're watching it happen today. The wild card is that there's a whole other universe of a network. It's a wireless device to an antenna that then is connected to a physical piece of something, some media, which has been traditionally copper, could be coax, needs to be fiber. Less than 10% of the towers in the United States are fed by fiber today. The wireless internet will engulf the fixed internet because mobility is what everyone needs, because we're not always in the same place. And other countries in the world, which are vastly smaller than the United States, are already there. And the reason why they're already there is because they're smaller than the United States. They have a smaller geographic area, therefore they have a smaller problem to solve. And that problem is solved, my friends, with money. You must make an investment in the physical network assets. Yeah, their network looks the same. There's towers, there's fiber, there's a carrier hotel, there's routers. But when you're dealing with a country the size of Luxembourg or Muscat or some other place that's relatively small, Bahrain just announced that they have a national broadband plan based on fiber and wireless distribution. Same thing. Bahrain is half the size of Rhode Island, okay? Half the size of Rhode Island. Rhode Island is the smallest state in the United States of America. Rhode Island doesn't have a state fiber plan because the United States doesn't have a national fiber plan like this, at a national level. This is what unlocks all of those pieces. Fiber to towers, fiber to buildings, fiber to existing networks. Now, Allied Fiber does not build off the right-of-way. We stay on the right-of-way. All the existing networks that are there come to us, to the edge of the right-of-way, and then we bring them into those handhold points. And if they're lucky enough to be right here, we could bring them straight into one of our colos. Carrier neutral, lease as many cabinets as you want. How much space do you need? What kind of power do you need? AC, DC, it's all generator backed. And once they're there, by the way, they don't even need to lease fiber to get to the carrier hotels. They could sit here and buy wavelengths and Ethernet transport from the carriers that are coming through. Essentially taking the value of the meeting room in the carrier hotel and bringing it out to the people in the field, to the middle of PA and Ohio and Indiana and Virginia and wherever. Most of those folks aren't ever going to go all the way to 60 Hudson Street or 350 East Cermak in Chicago or 1 Wilshire in LA or whatever. This is a physical layer plan, and that's it. We're in the real estate business. We are landlords. This is our property. Fiber, colo, power. There happen to be a lot of towers already on the Norfolk Southern Railroad right-of-way, so we have the ability to have direct access to that, which means that the whole notion of fiber to the tower is dramatically different for Allied. We don't have to build 30 miles to get to a tower. The tower's there now. It's about 100 feet away, 150 feet away. So for microwave distribution, those towers become microwave meet-me points. So the microwave transport provider can sit here and shoot out into the field and hit towers and buildings and whatever, and it's fiber fed, and that fiber goes right back to the carrier hotel. They can drop their gear there or at the closest Allied Fiber co-location facility and light up a layer 2 transport network, DWDM, Ethernet. They can have their routers sitting in one of our colos or in a carrier hotel or data center somewhere else, as long as they can shoot light that distance. And for us, it's all great. We don't impose anything on anyone. We like what everyone does. As long as it's NEBS, as long as it's OSHA, it's fine. Does it fit in a 23-inch cabinet? Does it take AC or DC power? Do you need to buy services from our tenants? Do you need maybe fiber from us? Maybe you don't need long haul, maybe you only need short haul. Maybe you're an RLAC and you want to come in here, or you're a school and you want to come in here, and you just lease the short haul piece from us to get into the colo and then buy the long haul service from someone else that's lit. All great. The fact is, our facilities become the marketplace, and it levels the playing field because now the long haul providers provide a more competitive price for their service. Why? Well, they're using this fiber for their own city-to-city long haul purposes. So for them to do a sub-rate drop in an Allied colo where they already have regen equipment is an incremental cost to them. They just add a shelf, drop in a card, peel out a circuit. There's really no additional cost. They don't have to build anywhere. They don't have to go anywhere. The customer came to them. So they're going to get very competitive with the price for services. And this is, again, a repeat of exactly the same thing that happened at 60 Hudson and 56 Marietta and other carrier hotels in the US and all around the world.
25 minutes.
We have a data center solution. As you can see, I referred to this a little bit earlier. Anybody can build subtending dark fiber rings off of the Allied Fiber system to feed data centers out in the field. So everyone's clustering in New Jersey or in Santa Clara or in Silicon Valley. This system opens up the US and allows land that's currently unusable and power, plenty of power, cheap, no glass. No glass, no data center. You can buy the land, you can build a building, great cheap power, but if you can't get your own dark fiber, there's no point in building the site. So obviously we understand that, and there are a half a dozen major data center development projects going on right now using the Allied Fiber route as their basis, and they're looking for property all along the way where they could get a good land deal, where they could build a building, cheap power, tax incentives, breaks from the state. You know, each state has created these economic development zones where they're giving away everything. Well, now you can literally find that zone and plop it in there and say, well, you know, how many miles away is it from the Allied Fiber network? Norfolk Southern Railroad itself owns acres and acres of property all along the route. Rail yards, track yards, pieces of land that they've bought. They're very motivated to do deals with people that want to build data centers. And by the way, for us, it's easy, because if it's adjacent property, there's nobody else to deal with for the lateral. Okay, it's important. This is the tower strategy I was referring to earlier. Subtending fiber laterals, microwave shots to towers 5 to 10 miles off. A subtending dark fiber ring could be built where dozens of towers could be hit. And not only towers, but schools and a hospital and whatever. Dark fiber, leased. You could actually build a ring, and then you could go to the Allied Colo here and there, and you could actually use the long haul side as a protect path, the short haul side as the access path, and another subtending ring, and another, and another, and another. This opens up the US. Now, it's very important to understand that what Allied Fiber is doing is not to solve the problems of the entire United States. It's not possible. It can't be done. We're not going to be in New England. I'm sorry, Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont. We're not going there. But other people are there, or could be there, or could take the same exact model, which is why it's generic, and apply it to other states where we're not going to be. And then you just have to find a common intercept point to us with this design, this model. Same thing, terms, pricing, conditions, neutral, open, and extend the model into other places. And in a reasonable period of time, 3 to 5 years, the majority of the United States could be covered with this infrastructure. And then it would allow for other network operators to come in over it, lease exactly the physical facilities they need to operate their business. And then broadband could actually be brought out, whether by fiber or by microwave, and then you have 4G distribution. It is a system. So where are we today? At our phase 1, New York, Chicago to Ashburn, Virginia through Harrisburg, PA, and you can go on our website, alliedfiber.com, and you can download all of our maps and see all of this information. But in brief, 97% ducted, the balance is being completed. All of our vendors have been identified for the fiber cables, for the shelters. We don't buy equipment because we don't like the network. There's a question raised about that, which I'll touch on in a second. We are presently executing customer MSAs. This is also very important. There is a window of opportunity that is open now, but it won't be open forever. And that window is that we are fielding requests from any network operator. It doesn't have to be a carrier. It could be a search firm or a content provider or a data center operator or whatever that needs dark fiber. Short haul and long haul, just long haul, whatever. We're taking their requests and we're literally building a custom network. This whole system is built on demand. There's nothing about it that's spec. This is all based upon real carriers and network operators coming to us, asking us to build this. And there's some orders for New York, Chicago for a single pair. There's some for a ribbon. There's some for 36, 48, 72. We have orders for 144 fibers within certain states that are augmenting existing networks to create a protect side, or the glass that they have there is old and they need to retire it, so they want to roll over onto our fiber. And the economics are so compelling. Our facilities are actually driving revenue to them in many cases. all of these factors play into why it's important for us to collect this data now. As we learn more about what the buyers need, we can right-size the network. What we don't want to do is draw a line in the sand and then 2 months after we've ordered the fiber cable and the shelters, find out that we just landed some big order that's going to chew up all the rest of the available space in all of our colos and eat up 3/4 of what we have left in terms of fiber inventory. That wouldn't be so great. So this window of opportunity is open now and will be open for the next several weeks, but it will close. So all the deals we're actively working on with the major network operators in the U.S., wireless backhaul providers, etc., ISPs, and they know who they are. If you're not talking to us, now would be a really good time. If you think in your capacity planning for the next 12, 24 months that you're going to need dark fiber then, now's a good time to ask. You'll get pre-construction pricing and you'll get the network built to your design. The fiber type that you want, the amount of space that you need, and the specific amount of power. This is important when we have people coming to us asking for 6 cabinets and 12 cabinets per site, because we don't want to build a small shelter and run out before we can build a bigger shelter. It helps the whole process. So we're in the process of doing that, executing the MSAs, and right now, based upon that window and how long it's open for, and then when we reach certain thresholds with the buyers, we anticipate our phase 1 to be completed by the end of this year, beginning of next year. There's some factors in there for weather and other things, but the fact of the matter is that the infrastructure that we're building and the deals we're doing with the buyers, these are 20-year IRUs in most cases. So if it takes them an extra month to do the proper planning, so what? It's a 20-year deal. And if it takes us 6 months or 7 months to complete, it's really negligible, because they're going to put so much into this and other successive phases that this is the infrastructure they're basing their backbone on for the next couple of decades. These are important things to understand about where Allied Fiber is in its process, aside from our mission and our philosophy and everything else. With that, I'll conclude. I think it's been about a little under an hour.
52 minutes.
52 minutes. Less than the audio piece, but at least I captured it all and got the video and got the slides in there. There were 2 questions that were asked previous to the meeting, which I'll address now. The first question was in regards to service level agreements. We don't sell lit services, so there are no SLAs on lit because that's not what we do. The SLA that we have on the physical layer is that in the event of a fiber fault or an outage at the facility, which would most likely be something related to power, we respond immediately and we communicate to all the customers immediately, and we will be on site within 4 hours. That's what we do to assess the issue, and then we set the time frame for resolution. This is no different than any other physical layer network. Since we're physical layer, we don't provide the lit ring side protection. That's the job of the people that buy our facilities. That's what our tenants do. So if our side is down, they go to their protect side until our side is fixed. That's no different than how subsea networks work or anything else for that matter. So it's immediate response, customer communication, 4-hour on-site, and then when we've assessed what took place, we'll communicate back to the customers as to what we're being told as to how long it will take to resolve. And there's a whole host of things that can happen, fiber cuts and things like that, but they get resolved, and it's a matter of how you address the situation and resolve it. Then there was another question beyond that one, which was, do we provide any active op-amp, or do we only lease the co-location facilities for buyers to put their optical amplification equipment in it? Well, I just went through the whole presentation, but to answer the question, no, we don't provide hosted op-amp. Interesting concept. Maybe someone will start a business to do just that. But we're strictly a landlord. We're in the real estate business. We encourage people to work with any vendor they want. As a matter of fact, while I have everybody's attention for this, because I'm sure a lot of people are going to watch this video, and I hope you have Wi-Fi in here. No, it's not on. Anyway, the dark fiber community on TMCnet, tmcnet.com, the dark fiber community. It's a site that we set up working with TMCnet and JSA, our marketing PR firm, to act as the sole resource for all the vendors in the community, including Force 10 and other equipment vendors, and people that provide maintenance and support and installation, people that build data centers, people that build fiber laterals, people that build towers, people that finance all of this stuff. They finance the construction of physical network assets, the purchase of equipment. They finance networks. We have a site for all of that because, number one, the vendors call us all the time and ask us, how can we work together? And they're a little confused because they think we're a carrier, so they want to sell us gear. We're like, no. And they're like frustrated. They go, but then how do we work together? And it's like, well, okay, why don't you become a member of the dark fiber community? And they go, well, what's that? It's basically a community for everyone. It's a billboard for everyone. So it allows by section. So in equipment, there's DWDM, there's Ethernet, there's microwave, there's routers, and so on. And then all the other sections, all the way down to third-party co-location, etc. It allows for anyone that wants to build their own network to go to one place and select each piece that they need. And they have a choice. It's like going to the department store. They've got multiple vendors. Today we've got Cisco, Adva, Ciena, Nokia, Siemens, Optilion, XKL. I'm doing this from memory. Calix. Forgive me if I forgot anybody. That's just in the equipment section. And then there's others. For microwave, there's Gigabeam, there's Skyfiber for optical wireless broadband, etc., etc. So it's important to understand that, no, we're just a landlord, but we're not a hands-off landlord. We don't do hosted op amps, but we'll introduce you to everybody in the world that'll either sell you the gear or sell you the gear and run it or provide you a managed service, etc., etc. And that's just for the network piece. There's a lot of other dimensions to this, including the carrier network services dimension. A lot of the buyers that are coming to us that just want to take colo space in our facilities, on our colos, are asking us who can we buy wavelengths and Ethernet and IP transit from. So we take all of our tenants that sell those services and put them in that section as well. So it's simple. Either you find it by chance on the website, or when you ask, we send you the link, and there's the environment. You can literally just click on the logos, you can download their white papers, you can get a direct contact at that entity that knows us. The value of that is immeasurable. It just cuts to the chase. You don't have to call the 1-800 number or go on the website. You can literally send an email to the person that we deal with at that service provider that knows about that specific node in that county or town, and they can quote you a price right there. And if you can get to that colo, you can buy it.